person who comes into hospital for the first time, whatever the reason would be, and probably don't realise that they have got some artistic things in themselves, which probably through their life or whatever, they've never really had probably the opportunity or the time or the know-how or things like this to actually sit down and do some sort of painting.
Can you explain nothing? I mean nothing, as you would put it, sort of in inverted commas, because I can't, because that's what this is.
The spontaneous imagery that occurs in art therapy comes from the unconscious, which by definition is unknowable, out of which are created living experiential symbols. The transcendent function, a concept of analytical psychology, produces through a psychological process a uniting symbol between the conscious and unconscious systems of the psyche. This focusing of images from the inner experience of irrational fantasy through the lens of consciousness results in plastic form, which is conflict resolving, integrative, and healing in its effect. At the same time, there is a progressive movement of psychic energy, or libido, from archetypes in the collective unconscious to the conscious. This implies a view of the human psyche as not just consisting of brain metabolism and complex patterns of electric depolarization along countless nerve axons. Psyche has and needs a somatic aspect, but it is something in itself with its own definable creative life and its own laws and structure. Art therapy can be appreciated then as an activity having a central therapeutic role in modern psychiatric rehabilitation.
Father Bruce was ordained into the Anglican Church in 1923. He later joined the Cowley Fathers, an Anglican community, before being admitted as a ward patient to the psychiatric unit. Over the past 30 years, he has become a long-stay patient, with the only clear diagnosis of his illness being that of an epileptic personality. His artwork is concerned mainly with the 20 years of his life spent in the Anglican community and his deep religious beliefs. The paintings are a fusion of his inner world with his former memories. The expression of this fantasy world, which protects the ego and allows the patient to function in a role he could no longer follow outside. These figures were made by a Jewish woman who had left Poland during the Second World War. She had worked as a nurse and later became well known as a carver. She had been admitted to the hospital with depression and was reluctant to attend art therapy. Gradually, with some persuasion, she came to art therapy and began to play with the clay and produce this head. These musicians were very similar to a series of figures she produced when she first began to carve, and were important as they seemed to mark a transition in her mood as her depression began to lift. The last figure she produced was of a large head. She felt the head to be brutal and unfeeling, and seemed to want to destroy it, perhaps because it reflected many of her bad experiences during the Second World War.
It's very peaceful, doesn't it? A lot of my other paintings are very tormented. And similar to them, my paintings have been savage, they've been beautiful. It's all savage.
What we're dealing with clearly is the function of images in the life of mental patients. So it might be a good idea just briefly to hazard a rather amateurish definition of what an image is. I would like to suggest that an image is when inside our heads, in our consciousness, certain things which weren't together before come together and seem to have some kind of meaning in being gathered together in that particular configuration. I don't want to be any more technical than that. And obviously images are extremely important in everybody's life all the time, whether they're advertising images or images in art or music or drama. And evidently too, they have an enormously important potentiality in the treatment of mental patients.
I wonder, Diane, do you think that image-making process is a central feature of art therapy?
I think it certainly is. I think there are two major aspects to art therapy. That is the image-making process as one, and the context within which the image-making takes place as another. That is the safe space within which the images are made. Image-making is not always very easy for many people, although we are bombarded by images all the time. And for many patients, their initial feeling is one of anxiety and fear at the idea that they may be found wanting, that what they're going to produce is not good art, or it's going to look wrong or childish or silly or something like that.
Going back to Jesse, the matchstick man maker, he also has produced some paintings which are quite vivid and sort of strong paintings, don't you think?
I think there's one back there, isn't that?
Oh yes,
Yes, there is. There's one in the
yes,
background.
with the river.
Yeah, there's the more pictorial oil paintings, a work which he produces more for himself, in a way. It's more a conversation with himself.
What I find very interesting, Joanne, is that I know Jesse like you do, and he's a person who has difficulty in verbalizing and verbalizing material and repressed material, and he does feel safe, and he does enjoy the work with you. And this seems to have become a sort of, he doesn't have a job, and it seems to have become a central activity of his life. Without it, he sinks very quickly into a depression. Now, how can psychiatrists grasp this very important image-making process as being so centrally therapeutic? Because the education of psychiatrists is you have to make diagnosis, you have to give appropriate medication, and you have to talk a little to the patient and understand them. And that is all that is necessary. Why is art therapy, therefore, necessary? In what way does art therapy help?
Why should an art therapist be art trained? Why shouldn't they just say, well, here's some paints and brushes, you go ahead and make something out of it?
There are, in fact, many, I find, who are very interested in art, either that they do practice themselves or that they're interested in music or drama, so that I think most are not without some sympathy for the creative process. Psychiatrists are no different to all of us, that most people are quite worried when it comes to actually painting, putting something onto the paper, the page, or making an object.
I'm wondering, what is it that really brings closely together art and psychosis, if you like? Is there anything? I mean, I'm thinking of Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, which not everyone accepts. But from the collective unconscious, Jung thought you had images, and these images can be molded into art by an artist, such as yourself. And a psychotic patient isn't able to come to terms with all this turmoil of inner images from the collective unconscious, and that's why they come to us, and we have to try to treat them. In a way, are we trying to make them into not into artists, but trying to help them towards some sort of artistic and creative process as part of the treatment?
You mentioned the transcendent function in your introductory remarks. Is that the kind of mediator between the conscious and the unconscious?
Yes, I mean that is the uniting. The transcendent function is the uniting symbol, which is an image. A symbol is an image, and as it is produced in the art therapy setting, So it brings together the unconscious part of the person with the conscious part. I think this is what is integrative, this is what is healing. And Edith Kramer in the States talks about sublimation in art therapy, which is integrative and healing in its effect. And I think she's implying there what Jung states implicitly, that as the image is formed, so the conscious and unconscious parts of the personality come together. The image is the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious world, the world of the rational world and the world of irrational. There are certain syndromes. We mentioned one, this very thought-disordered late adolescent who was totally lost and who had stopped thinking. And in my clinical experience, to get that sort of patient into an art therapy situation, once they can actually produce images, you're half the way there, because this releases them from the darkness, if you like, from the chaos. Once the images start to spontaneously appear, and they form them with Joanne's help, and you can reduce the levels of arousal or extreme anxiety with medication, they start to become conscious. I was mentioning consciousness, that we are helping to make the patients more conscious with the use of imagery making and medication. This is also aiding their cognitive processes. And I'm wondering whether art therapy, in fact, is another form of cognitive therapy.
I would like to think that as a result of your work, what is happening, perhaps not in every case, but in a lot of cases, is not simply that you are mending, so to say, a piece of broken china that arrives in your hands in fragments and restoring it to some sort of status quo and putting it back out again into the world. What you're really doing is remaking people as far more autonomous, far more creative, far happier people than they had ever been before, because in your hands they will have had an experience which life has almost certainly, in most cases, denied them until they had it from you.
They might be more discontented and more angry people than Christopher as well. I don't think that we should also give the impression that, as is sometimes, I think, erroneously thought, that art therapy is a very bland kind of sedative. In fact, I don't think it's that at all. I think it's quite the opposite in many cases. It gets people thinking. It starts people wondering, well, why am I in this situation? I can actually do something about it. I'm not at the mercy of events totally. I have a choice in the matter. Even if the first choice when they come into the art therapy room is, well, what colour do I use? I think that example you gave was really interesting.
And as you say, Diane, that kind of autonomy could make people angry and highly critical of the environment they find themselves in on discharge. But on the other hand, they are now at a certain distance from their anger. Instead of the whole edifice collapsing on top of them, they can see what's happening and criticise it and maybe do something about it.
Hopefully use it positively and constructively.
There was a leading article in the Times which expressed very strong criticisms of Soviet policies in relation to political dissidents who were treated as psychiatric patients in institutions such as the Serbsky Institute. And there was a good deal of preliminary evidence that abuse of psychiatry was going on. There were diagnoses such as reformist paranoia, which didn't make a very strong clinical impression upon us. There were critics of psychiatry, such as Thomas Sass, and to some extent R.D. Laing, who took the view that all psychiatry was an abuse. The psychiatrists were merely passive and slavish agents of coercion. So we had this sort of view, which was becoming fairly widespread among some paramedical people, I mean, some social workers, I think some psychiatrists even accepted this view, that we were engaged in the suppression of free thought, suppression of dissent. And here was a genuine abuse of psychiatry. Our position had to be quite unequivocal. So we devoted a good deal of time and a good deal of publicity to our views and our activities in this field. I think the ethical problems are, as you know, exceedingly difficult, but they are difficult in medicine. Whether one has the right, for example, to take away the freedom of an individual in order to bring him on a compulsory basis into hospital. One does this with great reluctance. And of course, ethical problems are not completely resolved. They have to be under constant scrutiny and subject to constant debate. That's one sort of ethical issue. I had other interests outside medicine at that time, still very active, was very interested in music.
You're a pianist, I believe.
I'm a pianist. I wanted to be a musician at one time, but that didn't seem realistic. We are looking at psychiatry as a human science. Some people say this is not science at all. I don't agree with them.
The human science aspect, is this the art, which is...
Well, you can call it the art. I think art in the sense of imagination and the product of your empathy certainly is an operation. I believe that this can be refined, tightened up, rendered more precise and reliable. And I don't think it's completely impervious to the scientific approach. But for an indefinite time ahead, I do not believe that we're going to have a biological language in terms of the behavior of neurons or in terms of molecular biology that enables us to dispose of the psychological and the psychodynamic language.
After becoming a psychiatrist, I studied Jung's analytical psychology in Switzerland. I returned to Zurich in 1984 to make a television recording at the studios of Zurich University about Jung. This was with Professor CA Meier, one of his closest associates. We discuss Jung's work in its similarity and differences with Freud's and its relationship to art therapy, group therapy, and chemotherapy. The nature of the archetypal images from the collective unconscious are contemplated, bringing the dialogue onto the curative power of certain dreams, a development surely of Freud's most creative work, the interpretation of dreams. In conclusion, The religious dimension of Jung's approach is illustrated in another case history, for he was both an empiricist and a phenomenologist, and the phenomenology of normal, neurotic, and psychotic human experience includes a religious attitude. Good afternoon, Professor Meier. What sort of personality did Jung have?
Well, he was probably the most complete personality I ever knew in my lifetime. He could show every facet of life. He was, first of all, a scientist, no doubt. Then he was a passionate lover of nature, and he was a very gay person at occasions, and a very severe and strict and a taskmaster on the other hand. It's just according to the conditions or according to the opportunity, he could adapt to most every possible situation, and he was really a complete personality, I would like to call it.
How important do you think was Jung's relation with Sigmund Freud?
It obviously was of the greatest importance. They couldn't agree more on the fact that the, shall we say, the consideration of the unconscious is of the utmost importance for mental health. It took a very sad and dramatic turn, which ended it. It was very unfortunate, but apparently absolutely unavoidable for Jung, because he had to find his own way independently of Freud and go beyond. Which was, I was terribly, how shall I say, I was almost shocked when Jung one day appeared at my office with a package under his arm, threw it on my desk and said, "Here are Freud's letters to me. Do whatever you like with them."
And you liked Freud?
It was very charming.
Yes.
And he encouraged me to come back and study under him and so on and so forth. Then I went and left. Now, this is too damn personal, I'm afraid. I left and stood on a platform which goes down there, from which a few steps go down to Berggasse, and couldn't move. Paralyzed. Couldn't move. I thought I was crazy, going absolutely mad. Didn't know why. Suddenly came to my mind, oh, this man wants to kill you. Paralysis finished, I went home. That was, of course, a reaction that told me this would mean spiritual death, you know, if I went into Freud analysis.
You don't think Freud was close to the spirit?
He wasn't. I would say that in Greek antiquity in particular, we have no such notion of an unconscious, simply because it was there existing overtly in the whole pantheon and in the mythology of the Greeks, and in their poetry, in their drama, in the literature in general. It was omnipresent, sort of. And so we have a possibility of seeing that in a way this coexistence of the unconscious, what we nowadays call the unconscious, and the conscious world was almost ideally functioning. Whereas in the course of our cultural development, we more and more lost this contact and became, shall shall we say, correspondingly neurotic, if you like, had to find ways and means how to make up for the split that had taken place. And Freud and Jung, analytical approaches are, in point of fact, nothing but an attempt at re-establishing this contact.
Did Jung's understanding of the collective unconscious come from his initial years of work as a psychiatrist?
It certainly did, yes. Yes. Because those delusional systems of those schizophrenics and other psychotics had so much in common when it comes to root, basic, what we would now, with our knowledge, call mythological motifs or themes, that he had to go into it, as you can see from his book on symbols of transformation. He had to go through an enormous lot of mythological material in order to be able to understand what was really going on in the patients.
How important do you consider dream interpretation to be, and is there any case that you can recollect of a dream being very impressively connected with cure?
With the cure?
Mm.
Well, indeed I do. I mean, I have had several such experiences in the course of my 50 years of work, and I'd say that we are always deeply impressed and moved by such occurrences because the immediacy of, the coincidence, literally, of cure, dream and cure is something very impressive in a single case. This is why I took a great deal of time to study what happened at the clinics of Asclepius in old Greece.
And dreams were essential for the cure, were they?
Absolutely. They're the only thing that was done. They seemed to have succeeded in making people produce a cured dream.
Are there records of this?
Oh, lots of. We have at least about 90 case histories.
Does this have significance, therapeutic significance today?
I would say so, very much so. I think we ought to re-establish Asclepius, where your poor patients have a chance to have a healing dream. I'm as superstitious as that. But it needs apparently a certain, well, the conditions are, it's difficult to create such conditions. They may have to exist previously. A place like Epidaurus, for instance, which was the most famous Asclepieion in antiquity, has something in its air, something healing. There's no doubt about it. Now you can't create that.
In the psychosomatic field, can you give an example of a case that you've treated?
Oh, well, yes, for instance, yes, I can. A lady, an English lady, and she suffered, she was at the dermatology clinic in Zurich because she suffered from generalized psoriasis and erythroderma, which in those days, this was about, must have been about 40 years ago, which in those days without cortisone, etc., could easily be lethal. And the professor of dermatology didn't know what to do, and so he called me and said, could you perhaps do something for the poor patient? And So I came and saw her once and asked her to pay attention to her dreams, if possible. Then I saw her the next day, and she was completely cured. The erythroderma had disappeared. Only a few local spots of psoriasis remained. And the professor didn't know what to make of it. They all just shook their head, and I asked her now, how come? And she said, well, I've had this dream. I wrote it down, and that was the dream, very short. She had been in the country somewhere, and suddenly walking, and suddenly on the little footpath, a golden ball of the size of a ping pong ball rolled along on the path. She followed it quietly. Finished. That was the dream. That coincided with the overnight cure.
Which is very interesting, and this is an example of synchronicity.
I would say so. I would say so. I wouldn't hesitate. I mean, at all events, you cannot claim of its being a causal connection, can you?
Difficult, yes.
Yeah. Very difficult.
So you think the synchronistic...
Sheer coincidence, all right, fine.
The synchronistic phenomena occur in the psychosomatic field?
Oh, absolutely, I'm sure of that. Yeah.
If one considers the historical and cultural aspects of dreams, one of course is reminded of Jacob's dream and the ladder and the angels descending and ascending to heaven, a dream which shows the connection symbolically between earth and heaven. That sort of dream, of course, is what Freud and especially Jung would call an archetypal dream.
What is your recollection of one of your most impressive cases that you've treated?
One case indeed is still to the day, to me, extremely moving. That was in the early days at Burghölzli. It must have been in 1930, when I took over the most disturbed ward of male patients, and my predecessor recommended me not to go near one patient who was standing like a statue in a corner there, because he was supposed to be dangerous, hit or whatnot. All right. So when I came to the ward next day, I looked at him more attentively, and I suddenly noticed that he was, all right, he was perfectly stiff, but his eyes were anything but stiff. He was full of life. So I thought there was something should be done, and approached him, reached out my hand, and he immediately took it, shook it very heartily. And I took him along, said, come with me. And took him out of the ward against heavy protest of the nurse. And I took him to my room and asked him to sit down and to tell me what was bothering him, etc. Immediately started talking. Fast, somewhat subdued, but fast. Poured out a lot of material. And after an hour, I took him back. Next day, took him again to my room, and then further days, I went to the park with him, walking, and he simply was pouring out pouring out all the stuff. And after 2 weeks, after 1 week, he was on a good ward, and after 2 further weeks, he could be discharged, dismissed. And then in '39, there was a Swiss national exhibition in Zurich, town milling with people, and one Sunday I also decided to go downtown with my wife, and there's a Limmat, somebody from across the street beckoned and waved to me. And at first didn't understand why, and then I realized it was this fellow, this patient. That was 8 or 9 years later. And he came all across the street. I was very, very friendly, very happy, and presented me with his bride, a nice little young girl. Told me that he had been working ever since he was released from Burghölzli, and was very happy and made his living and was looking forward to getting married, etc., etc. Then he took his leave of absence and whispered into my ear, and isn't it striking, doctor, what good such a disease can do for you? So I thought, this is now a case that could have happened at an Asclepius Aeon, where by the way, I forget to say this, where the ex-patient was regarded of being a religiosus. That was all that was required. You didn't even have to make an offer or sacrifice or anything. The people there were sure that you were transformed into a religiosus.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Professor Meier.
I know you're all very hungry, and I'm not going to keep you more than possibly 2.5 minutes. It is very good that you have all been able to come to the conference and to the dinner, and I have learned much more today than I had expected. I would like to thank very much Professor Joanne Mizik and Professor Sheila Hollins for speaking today. My especial thanks to Rachel, and she wants to be called Rachel McDougall Jenkins because she's really a Scot in disguise, and John Cox for their sustained support to make the conference possible. I want to remind you that John Cox is also a professional tenor and will be singing 2.5 William Blake songs at the end of the dinner, so don't rush away after the dinner. Finally, our heartfelt thanks to Henrietta Fernley, who is like a fairy queen, you may all have met her now, who has been the real conference manager and organizer. Thank you very much.